Hello. Today we're going to be talking about visual arguments and also slogans, but mostly visual arguments. Ooh, we may also be talking about smoking a little bit. Visual arguments. Visual arguments present two challenges on top of the challenges of a regular text-based words and sentences argument that we've been looking at. The first challenge is that a visual argument needs to be unpacked and translated into words so that we know what we're dealing with. Only after we figured out what the image is saying and put it into words can we apply our critical reading skills to it. The second challenge is that visual arguments often use non-rational means of persuasion. They may appeal to our emotions or try to manipulate us in subtle ways, and sometimes not so subtle, actually. We have to be aware of this and take it into account in our evaluation of the argument or our response to it. Despite what you may have been told, emotions are not necessarily irrational, and feelings can be relevant to whether you should accept an argument or not. It's a long story, but the short version is appeals to emotion are sometimes valid and sometimes not. The role of emotion in reasoning is a complex topic that we will be returning to more than once. So what do I mean by visual arguments? Well, I'm using it as a general term for arguments that present information in the form of images. These images have to be decoded by the viewer, technical term, and often rely upon background knowledge. Visual arguments, when they're done well, can convey a lot of information all at once. It's this concentrated meaning that makes them punchy. They grab your attention and hit you with a bunch of thoughts and feelings. Because these thoughts and feelings aren't overtly stated, they can fly under the radar of your critical thinking skills and maybe get you to go along with things that you wouldn't accept if they were said out loud. Or another possibility is that their effect is more subtle, nudging you in a particular direction so gently that you don't even notice. But those nudges can add up over time in a process that some people call manufacturing consent. This is why visual arguments are so interesting. Visual arguments include stuff like posters, billboards, memes, ads, and cartoons. Even stuff like statues and monuments can present visual arguments sometimes. At the time of writing, there's been a lot of a hullabaloo in the US about monuments to Civil War generals. That is, the American Civil War and the monuments, usually in the form of statues, usually on horses. People have been taking them down, and other people have been getting very mad about that. You may have heard about it in the medias. How can a statue be an argument, and what are people so upset about? I'm glad you asked. Here I am in Charlottesville, Virginia, and behind me is a statue of famous Confederate General Robert E. Lee. You see, in 1861, the United States fought a civil war over a little thing called slavery. And this is worth going into because it's cast a shadow on American politics and culture that has lasted to this day. Basically, a bunch of states, mostly in the southern half of the country, tried to secede from the United States. They tried to secede from the country because they were worried that the federal government was going to outlaw slavery. To put it very simply, the northern states wanted to get rid of slavery, and the southern ones wanted to keep it. Not all of the states in the southern half of the country wanted to keep slavery. Most of the northern states had already outlawed slavery, but it's usually talked about in terms of north and south. The southern states said that they were going to split off and form their own country called the Confederate States of America. And the other states, the ones in the North, said no. Long story short, the North won the war and slavery ended in the United States of America. Hooray. So, what you see behind me is a statue of Guy who fought on the losing side of that war. Not only the side which lost, but the side which history has judged rather adamantly was the wrong side, the pro slavery side. This is a monument to a man who fought for the cause of keeping Black people as property. You can see how some people wouldn't like that very much. Moreover, these statues were not created in the wake of the war as you might assume. They were mostly put up in the first half or the middle of the 20th century when Black people were getting more rights and political influence in the US. So quite a few people think that the real purpose of monuments like this one is to intimidate Black people, to remind them of a time when they were completely subjugated, and to say that some other people, people who happen to have the power to put up expensive monuments in public spaces, rather preferred things that way and would maybe like to return to them. Now you know the context, so let's apply some of this week's reading to the example at hand. How can you have an argument without words? Well, think about it this way. Somebody made this statue and put it here for a reason. They put it here to say something. It's not like a tree that grew here by itself or a parking lot that is here for a utilitarian reason, like you need to have somewhere to keep your cars. It costs money to make this thing. And you know how governments hate to spend money. Moreover, there's a reason why it's a statue of this man in this place. I mean, if they wanted to have a statue for some reason, they could have put up a statue of anybody. If they wanted a statue of a general, they could have put up a statue of a general who fought in World War II, not somebody who fought to preserve slavery. So, one of the most important things when it comes to analyzing visual arguments is the organization of the visual scene. Sometimes it's the first thing that you want to consider, and sometimes it's the second. You consider it after the context, like we've done just now. Unlike a picture on a screen, this is a real object in physical space, meaning that you have to be in some sort of physical relationship with it in order to look at it. So the physical space that it's in, as you can see, is wide and open. You might say it's commanding. Moreover, it is on top. Moreover, it is, as statues often are, on top of a big block of stone, so you have to look up at it. This sort of visual organization conveys power and authority. Because you have to look up at him, the guy seems impressive. Not only that, he's on a horse. This makes him even more big and impressive. He's on a horse on a big block of stone. He's sort of elevated twice. Because you have to look up at it, it dominates the foreground, and in the background, there isn't very much but the sky. This kind of goes together with the fact that it's a statue of a man on a horse. Everybody is more impressive when they're on a horse. And what is a horse? Well, a horse is an animal that you use as a beast of burden. It's another living thing that you use and control. So the spatial organization and what it is an image of go together. They kind of convey the same impression. They speak to hierarchy. A man on a horse is above other people, and a man on a horse is often in a position of power. A man on a horse on a pedestal conveys hierarchy. The idea that there's some sort of natural order where people belong above horses and some people belong above other people. Like this guy is above us on the pedestal. Notice how the different elements, who the person is, what he represents, and the visual organization of the scene fit together into a coherent meaning. That's one of the things you should look out for in analyzing visual arguments. Any one element alone isn't enough to nail down a meaning because it could have different possible meanings. But when different elements appear to have the same meaning, it gives you a reliable idea of what the thing is supposed to convey, what point it's trying to make. And when you have a point that you're trying to get other people to accept, that's what we call an argument. Not all posters and ads and stuff are visual arguments, of course. Sometimes they just tell you about stuff. A picture of a sexy model drinking a Pepsi might make you more inclined to drink Pepsi, but not because it presents you with reasons. I'm also including, under the heading of visual arguments, videos and other multimedia materials. Although I'm going to be spending less time talking about video, because video is actually easier to understand using conventional tools of argument analysis. You'll see what I mean. And also slogans. Visual arguments present two main advantages over regular old verbal arguments, and you can think of these advantages as reasons to use visual arguments instead of verbal ones. Reason number one, visual arguments are good at getting people's attention and maybe making them think about things that they otherwise wouldn't. Think about it. A billboard can reach thousands of people much more efficiently than walking up to them one by one and saying, "Hey, have you thought about buying an electric car? Here are some reasons why you should buy an electric car." That's not very efficient. Also a good way to get punched. The second reason is not at all funny, and this is that visual arguments are good at non-rational means of persuasion. A picture of Palestinian children killed by bombs is liable to make people care more than just being told that Palestinian children are being killed by bombs. Thousands of children, possibly tens of thousands of children. To get our minds off of dead children, here are some less upsetting examples of visual arguments from footage that I filmed when there wasn't a genocide going on. Here's an example of a poster. It shows a silhouette of a cop beating someone, and you could just see their hands, so they look very helpless. And it has these big, bright, eye-catching red text. You are 8 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than by a terrorist attack. Okay, so like I said, most visual arguments will employ some text, but if it's just text on like a pretty background or something, you know, like people, you see that on Instagram sometimes, it's just like a line, it's like an aphorism or something, and there's just some sort of pretty color fade background. That is not a visual argument. There's nothing there.
accept text. Cartoons. It's time to reclaim America from illegal immigrants, says this conservative-looking white guy. And a Native American-looking person says, I'll help you pack. Because, of course, the people who colonized America, the Americas, were, well, they were invaders. So this cartoon has a point, but notice that the point isn't stated. Like if I were to ask you what the thesis of this cartoon was, you could probably tell me what it was, but it's nowhere there in the text. You have to infer it. Here's an example of an ad. Oh, that text is pretty small. Do you know how much you really spend in cigarettes? And there's a picture of a crashed car, which is sort of made to look like a cigarette butt that's been put out. What do you think the main point of that is?
It could also be like the price of cigarettes really adds up over time, and like you could buy a car with that money.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that that's probably what they're getting at. Okay, so when I say advertisements, I don't just mean advertisements for products. There are political ads too, and charities have ads. Basically, what I'm interested in, how I'm distinguishing it, is has more to do with like the form. Like an ad is different from a poster insofar as a poster is something that you would normally see on a wall. An ad is something that you would normally see like in a magazine or on a website. And because they're in different forms, they're not going to work the same way. What would make a good poster wouldn't make a good ad on a website, and vice versa, usually. Videos. Here's an example of a video. So let's watch it. It's only about a minute long.
Introducing the 100% electric Nissan Leaf. Innovation for the planet. Innovation for all.
So if you didn't get it, the idea was, here's this polar bear who seems to be rendered homeless because of global warming, and he goes on this long journey, or she, maybe I'll just say she goes on this long journey, and then there's this guy who owns this Nissan something and gives him a big hug. Why does the bear give him a big hug?
Probably because it's an environmentally friendly car.
Yeah. The implication is that by buying this car, you'll be helping to save polar bears. So this is another case where the thesis isn't stated in the ad at all, and you need to have a fair amount of background knowledge to understand what it's about. It's also a good example of how videos can tell narratives. This is only a minute long, but it definitely tells a story that probably could be fleshed out into 30 minutes if they wanted to. Ultimately, what the ad wants to do is to get you to buy this electric car, but it goes about doing it by asserting that buying this electric car would be good for the environment. And of course, it definitely plucks on your heartstrings because of the fact that it's a polar bear, and everybody loves polar bears, including grizzly bears, actually. And it makes a polar bear into a character by having it go on this long journey. Polar bears and grizzly bears. Polar bears and grizzly bears can interbreed. We're discovering this now because of the polar bears are running out of habitat, so they're having to share habitat with the grizzly bears. So when you cross a polar bear with a grizzly bear, what you get is called a growler bear. And I think it's even bigger than either one. That was a TV commercial, which means it was an advertisement, but like I said, I'm dividing these up more by form than by purpose. A video of somebody talking at you does not qualify as a visual argument, at least not in this course. I said that one form of visual argument is videos, and I watch a lot of YouTube, and a lot of it is people making arguments. But if it's just somebody talking, then it's not a visual argument because it could just as easily be talking is just a different way of presenting text. There are numerous advantages to visual arguments, which largely have to do with their way to get your attention, with their way to condense information, and their way to perhaps manipulate you emotionally. I mean, a book doesn't come with a soundtrack, right? Let's look at the two people here. We've got like a old-ish, yeah, like middle-aged or older white man in a suit on the one side, and on the other side we have I'm going to say a woman of color. She's clearly represented as younger than the man in the suit, and she's also wearing, I don't know, looks like sports clothes. So we're just going to say she's wearing informal clothes. So these are represented as two very different kinds of people. So everything that is on the side of, on the left of the man here, these are all markers of privilege, right? He's white, he's male, he's older. The suit probably indicates a higher social class, meaning he has more money. I don't remember anybody mentioning alligators in the context of systemic racism, for example.
What I'm going to do now is show you how to do the assignment by going through an example of a different visual argument, one from the slides. To summarize, what we're going to be doing is taking a visual argument, figuring out what its premises and conclusion are, and writing them down in standard form. Then we are going to consider the visual features of the argument from the perspective of non-rational means of persuasion. It'll be easier to explain by going through the example. Then we're going to attempt to critically evaluate the argument, not just the premises and conclusion, but also the visual, non-rational means of persuasion that I just mentioned. Let's get started. This is an example of an advertisement that you might find in a glossy magazine or possibly on the internet. Where I come from, they say advertisement instead of advertisement, and they use the word as more or less synonymous with commercial. You know, like TV commercials or the ones that you see on YouTube. Those commercials are usually video, but for the purpose of this discussion, the word advertisement, actually, I'm just going to say ad. I'm going to use that word to refer to a still image. Still what? Still an ad. I'm sorry, that's not very funny. Oh, this is a pretty bold image. It looks like a crashed car in the shape of a cigarette butt. That's very striking. There's also a little bit of text here. The text is quite small. And as I look at it now, I think it's supposed to be sort of the color of cigarette smoke. The text is a lot less noticeable than the crashed car. Generally, images, whether they're photographs, paintings, or a computer generated image, which is what I think this is, usually have a foreground and a background. Normally, the focus will be on an object or person, or persons or objects, but sort of grouped in the foreground in front of a background. The lack of any content to the background and also the use of color really makes this one object in the image pop. I mean, you can't help noticing it. Now, although there's only one thing in this particular image, I want to take this moment to talk a little bit about framing and layout. Layout can visually represent relationships. Two things side by side with the same amount of emphasis can visually suggest that you're supposed to compare them. Comparing them can mean bringing attention to their similarities or their differences. Whoops. To use some media analysis language, similarities can be called parallels, but if it's the differences that we're supposed to be paying attention to, we would say that the things in the image are juxtaposed. In this case, we have only one object, roughly in the middle of the frame. Being in the middle of the frame usually means that we're supposed to pay attention to it, but of course, it's also the only object here. Now, I said it's roughly in the middle of the frame. It's offset a little bit on the horizontal axis to make room for the text here. The text is roughly where a second object in the frame would be if we're supposed to see the two things side by side, but the crashed car dominates the image for a bunch of reasons. One reason, perhaps the main reason, is that the car is rendered in color and with a density of detail. It's not like a drawing of a car, it looks like an actual car. The text, by contrast, is quite small and simple. In fact, it's even a little bit hard to read. The car is clearly supposed to be the center of attention, so the text, I assume, is commenting on it in some way. The text is telling us how to think about the car. What we have here is the case of a visual metaphor. A metaphor is when one thing represents something else. The purpose of a metaphor is to attach meanings that belong to one thing to some other thing. This hopefully helps us to notice something that we maybe didn't notice before. This car represents a crushed cigarette butt, meaning that the surface or literal content of the image is the car, but it's supposed to make us think about cigarettes. It makes us think about cigarettes because it looks like a cigarette. Because it looks like a cigarette. It has the same silhouette. It has the ashes down here, and it's in a position that is normal for a used cigarette. I recognize that most people don't smoke, but we do see used cigarettes in smoking areas all the time, and sometimes in non-smoking areas. Naughty. It looks like the way a cigarette looks like when it's ground into the ground or an ashtray to put it out. This is a very normal posture for a spent cigarette, but not for a car. And just in case we missed the visual metaphor, there is the text here to tell us that the topic of the ad is smoking. I think I may have mentioned this in the earlier clip, although ads often are trying to get us to buy products. They're not always. The purpose of an ad can be to get you to buy a product, but more generally, the purpose of an ad is to get you to buy an idea. It's trying to persuade you of something. You can think of an ad for a product as an argument whose conclusion is buy this car or buy this brand of cigarettes. Visual metaphor can be a way of communicating something, but often it's used as a means of persuasion. You have to think about why somebody decided to present their information in this form. Making a car look like a cigarette is a very strange thing to do, and they probably didn't do it just because they thought it would be cool. Visual metaphors are a bit like cartoons, and we talked a bit about cartoons in one of the previous clips. Cartoons have a punchline, and a punchline is a sort of aha moment. I get it. Well, a visual metaphor is like that. You have to make a connection in your mind. This aha moment has a kind of rhetorical power. This has to do with the fact that the thoughts and their connections are not all spelled out for us in words. We have to do a little bit of mental work to understand it. We sort of have to meet the argument halfway, and that can have the effect of making the argument more persuasive, but in a non-rational way, in a way that doesn't really have anything to do with the reasons or how well they support the conclusion. It's a psychological thing. You probably noticed that all of the examples of visual arguments that I've shown you contain some words. The cartoon had text. The Nissan ad, which was a video, had a voiceover. I think I have a cat. The cat is better than a voiceover, but never mind about that. Text or words in a visual argument doesn't usually contain either a premise or a conclusion, but it doesn't contain it usually so much as a gesture at it. Okay, the cat has just made a mess of things, so I'm going to stop the share right now and make sure that you're looking at the same thing as me. There we go. What was I saying? Oh, yes. In a visual argument, the text doesn't usually state either a premise or a conclusion. It more gestures at it. If the premises and conclusion were written out, then it wouldn't really be a visual argument, even though it might have a picture. The text in this ad is a question. It says, do you know how much you really spend on cigarettes? Now, we have seen that arguments often contain questions that are actually disguised statements. We call these rhetorical questions. Not just people like me who call them that. Ordinary people call them rhetorical questions. And in those cases, I've advised you to take the statement and turn it into a question. No, I said that backwards. That's hilarious. And in those cases, I have advised you to take the question and turn it into a statement. Premises and conclusions have to be statements because they have to assert something. If a question's going to be a rhetorical question, then it has to contain its own answer. Rhetorical questions specify an answer, usually without very much ambiguity. This is not a rhetorical question because it doesn't contain the information that we would need to answer it. Do you know how much you really spend on cigarettes? What's the answer? I don't know. I don't know you. As far as I know, you might not even be a smoker. We have to look elsewhere in the ad to find the information that would allow us to answer the question. But we don't have to look very far because there's only one object in the image, right? We've already talked about this. There's the car. There's the image of a crashed car in the shape of a crushed cigarette. Crashed car, crushed cigarette. Get it? So if we're going to regard the image of the car as an answer to the question, do you know how much you spend on cigarettes? What is the answer? Have you got the aha moment yet? Well, here it is. And if you didn't get it right away, that's fine, because I didn't get it right away when I saw this for the first time myself. I said that the crashed car is a visual metaphor. And what the crashed car represents is a cigarette. It's standing in for a cigarette. I think the implication, well, the car doesn't just look like a cigarette. It looks like a spent cigarette. It looks like a cigarette butt. It looks like a cigarette that someone has smoked and then thrown away. So is it saying that the money that we spend on cigarettes is thrown away? Is it like throwing away a car? Obviously, a car costs a lot more than a cigarette, but nobody smokes just one cigarette, right? The money adds up. If you buy a pack a day, that's 30 packs a month, which is 360 packs a year. I don't know how much cigarettes cost, but that sounds like a lot to me. Let's say that a pack of cigarettes costs $10 because that makes the math thing easy. So $10 per pack, 30 packs per month, that's $300 a month. I guess $300 a month is about the size of a car payment. And I think that's the low end of how much cigarettes cost. So the assignment says that you're supposed to write down the conclusion and the premises and put them in standard form. So let's do that now. I'm just going to type directly into the document. What did we say? You spend as much on cigarettes as you would on a car, or maybe a smoker spends as much money on cigarettes as they would on a car. Not sure. Let's make that a different color so that it stands out from the background. Here. This is sort of like the color of the car. I'm trying to be clever and not doing a very good job. Is this a premise or a conclusion? You spend as much on cigarettes as you would on a car. Well, I don't think that it's a conclusion because ads are generally trying to get you to do something. Remember when I said that an ad for a product is an argument whose conclusion is buy this product? Well, this ad, I don't think is telling you to buy cigarettes. Quite possibly, it's telling you not to buy cigarettes. So let's write that down. Stop smoking. Or no, wait. Let me change that. You should stop smoking. Something like that. So now we have both a premise and a conclusion. You spend as much on cigarettes as you would on a car. Therefore, you should stop smoking. Well, now it looks a little bit like an enthymeme, which means that we need to come up with a second premise to bridge the main premise and the conclusion. Here, let me try this. Smoking costs as much as a car. A car is better than smoking. I should probably indicate that those are premises. P1, P2. Standard form, remember? Therefore, you should stop smoking. That's one way that we could do it. Here's another way. P1, if you stopped smoking, you could afford a car. P2, being able to afford a car is good. Conclusion, you should stop smoking. Or maybe it would be good if you stopped smoking, which is very similar to you should stop smoking. Something like that. Because the visual argument doesn't spell out its premises, it doesn't specify them so much that it gives us the exact words. Therefore, there are probably some number of ways that we could write down the premises that and conclusion that would be equally okay. This is fine. The next step says, briefly explain any visual features of the argument that may help to make it more persuasive, but are not themselves reasons. There are two features that jump out to me here. Although they're not so much visual features as they are, let's say, information or intuitions that are conveyed by the visual features, which is fine. The first of these is that a crashed car is pretty scary. The first time I looked at this and I saw the crashed car, I sort of made the connection, cigarettes will kill you, a car crash will kill you, so maybe it's supposed to be making that connection between cigarettes and death in the form of a car crash. In fact, it looks a little bit, or it reminds me of, like the scary images that they put on packages of cigarettes in order to scare people into stopping smoking. I wouldn't know, of course, because I'm not a smoker myself. The second thing that I noticed has to do with value. Like a car is worth a lot of money. We don't think of a crushed cigarette as being worth anything, but have a look at this car. I mean, it's it seems to be in perfect condition, apart from the whole being crashed part. What I mean is it's shiny, it's clean, it doesn't have any marks on it. It's gold, actually. It's kind of gold in color, which you don't see very often. I'm told that's an expensive paint. And of course, gold is associated with value. Come to think of it, if you focus on the gold color, now the shape of the car looks a little bit like a bar of gold that's been sort of crushed. Maybe I'm stretching it. Maybe I'm bending it. The point is, the image conveys the impression of something that is worth a lot of money that has been needlessly thrown away. This is a visual feature of the argument that conveys meaning without words. And that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Number 5, the last step, says briefly explain any problems or weaknesses with the argument as presented. And you'll see that there are these tiny little footnotes here. which basically expand upon this and say that we're mostly concerned with problems or weaknesses with the visual features, but problems or weaknesses with the premises themselves are okay. That's an acceptable answer. Let's go back to the image. Okay, well, the image makes you think of car accidents, which makes me think of car insurance. And when you add up the cost of your car payments and your insurance and your fuel and maintenance and whatever, the things that people who have cars have to deal with, which is not me, it probably comes to quite a bit more than the cost of smoking, I would guess. I mean, I don't smoke and I don't have a car, so it's kind of difficult to weigh them. But cigarettes vary in price and the amount that you smoke, and cars also vary widely in price. What I'm driving at is that it's not necessarily true that if you quit smoking, that would entail that you could afford to buy a car. So in that sense, the ad is misleading. Also, you could make a case that cars are approximately as harmful as cigarettes. Cars do kill people, cars are expensive and kind of a pain, and of course, the carbon emissions coming mainly from cars and things related from cars may, in the future, kill us all. When you have the attitude toward cars that I have, and I'm definitely not the only person who feels that way, there's nothing special about me. Framing it as a choice between buying a car or buying cigarettes, both of those things seem to be bad. It's not very persuasive to me. Another possible problem is that if you find the image of the crashed car scary, then this visual element could be manipulating you through fear. And this could be a problem because the fear might prevent you from assessing what the ad is telling you rationally. I mean, the ad is about smoking, not drunk driving or something. And I don't really understand how being scared of crashing your car could convince you to stop smoking. But hey, if the thought of a car crash, if the thought of being in a car crash distracts you away from the point that the ad is trying to make about smoking, then that's also a problem. So this would be an example of an acceptable response to question number 5 on the assignment. So I hope that gives you an idea of the sort of thing that I'm looking for on the assignment so that you can approach it with confidence.